B-52s over Hanoi. I said, Michael, we were chatting away about aviation and things. I said, Michael, really interesting. I started out as a sort of junior lieutenant flying B-17Gs over Berlin in '44. And I ended up bombing Hanoi in B-52s. I said, wonderful airplanes both. We got on very well. I tend to get on well with American pilots, I know a little bit of the Air Force. And I said, were you flying Gs or Hs? Oh, I was flying the G. Okay, so you're in a G over Hanoi. And he said the defensive arrangements were very familiar. Rung a bell. I said, whoever was setting these up was running the air defence of Berlin in '44. And I filed that away, and I thought, that is a really interesting bit of intelligence. I filed that away, and years later I got the opportunity to slip somebody into Hanoi to verify with the North Vietnamese that in fact the Adolf Galland had been organising the air operations in North Vietnam. Then I briefed in the Pentagon. Now the Pentagon were a bit suspicious originally. Oh, gee, Michael, we were right about Korea, but it's a bit of a stretch. We thought they were Russians. We knew they were white. We knew they weren't all Vietnamese, but we thought they were Russians. I said, nah, they were Germans, pretending to be Russians. They all spoke Russian. So they didn't use German. They knew about our operation, thanks to Eisenhower. They knew about our operation in Korea. They knew we were monitoring their frequencies. They'll all be speaking Russian. So American intelligence thought they were all Russians. But the Pentagon knew me, and about 2 days after I left the Pentagon, maybe a few days long, maybe 5 or 6 days, the then Secretary of State Donald Rumsfeld, nice man, flew on a previously unannounced trip to Hanoi that had been in his diary for the last 6 months. Usual story. It's not the first time I've had that happen. You provide a little bit of intelligence, and then somebody's flying somewhere in the world on a previously unannounced trip that the Pentagon says has been in their diary for the last 6 months, when you know full well, because you've been in the building, there was no trip to Hanoi planned. Nobody said, oh, by the way, the Secretary of State's going out, the Secretary of Defence is going out to Hanoi next week. We'll get him to check this out. And of course, Rumsfeld got confirmation from the Americans, from the North Vietnamese. And then I got a Jerry intelligence officer to cough this operation after a number of drinks in a bar in a hotel near the Pentagon. It was the Hyatt Crystal City, if you're interested. So that's Vietnam, run by the Germans. Now, where does this leave us? Well, we know the Cold War was a phony. The Cold War was being run from both ends by the Jerrys. Peter Sellers and Dr. Strangelove actually was sometimes comedy can sometimes be closer to the truth. Remember the old arm that you had to fight down. He was closer to the truth than he realised, because the hardliners on both the American side and the Russian side tended to be reporting to the Jerrys. Now, I'm not going to, you'll be pleased to hear, I'm not going to bang on for another 4 or 5 minutes. The chairman is nodding appreciatively. Where should we go as a country? Well, clearly the priority must be withdrawal from the European Union. There's absolutely no point staying in the EU, set up by German intelligence. Almost every key player involved in setting up the EU, including the German spy Jean Monnet, all reported to the Jerrys. Heath, interestingly, even Mountbatten. It's a very interesting little snippet that came our way recently. You may remember there's a very nice man called Earl Mountbatten of Burma, whose father was the German spy Prince Louis of Battenberg. Now, his father was spotted by British naval intelligence and forced out as First Sea Lord in 1914. Battenberg had been working for the Jerrys and had been passing over all the plans of our warships. Every British capital ship designed up until Battenberg was First Lord went over to Germany. And the German strategy at Jutland was partly predicated on Battenberg's advice, because it was Battenberg who briefed in the Treasury on what not to pay for on the armour of our battle cruisers. So we had inbuilt vulnerabilities suggested by a German spy to the Treasury, German spies in the Treasury. Lloyd George was a German spy, of course, you may have heard of him, Liberal politician, nasty piece of work, ran the last coalition government. Lloyd George reported to the Jerrys. Lloyd George promoted German spies to take over MI5, MI6, the Bank of England. The Governor of the Bank of England, Montague Norman, was a German spy. Vernon Kell, who set up MI5, German spy. All these people were German spies by design. That's why their names are put forward, because Lloyd George would ask the Germans, he'd ask Max Warburg, who was head of the Imperial German Secret Service, right, Max, we're setting up internal intelligence service, who do you want? Oh, Vernon Kell, one of ours. Great, thank you, Dankeschön. MI6, we're setting up MI6, who do we have? Mansfield Smith coming, oh, yep, absolutely, he's one of ours. Great. MI5 and MI6 don't really like me, because I know this, and if you look at the MI5 and MI6 websites, the official version of events is that Vernon Kell and C were not German spies, but they were. And MI5 and MI6 know this perfectly well. As is Stuart Menzies, you may have met Menzies. Yes, German spy. ran MI6 in World War II. Battenberg's a German spy, his son was a German spy. Again, interesting ethnic. Battenberg was German. I mean, he sounded pretty German. Prince Louis von Battenberg can't sound very much more German than Prince Louis von Battenberg. Father German spy, son a German spy, and Mountbatten was keen to take Britain into the EEC, and that was why he organised that little coup in '68 that nobody talks about. For those of you who don't know, somebody planned a little coup in '68. It got as far as the SES turning up at Heathrow. And Mountbatten at one point on that particular evening was running around in full combat rig. And the plan was he would take over as Prime Minister, they'd sack Wilson. I think they were going to blame Wilson for being a Russian spy. Not sure how they were going to get away with it, but Buckingham Palace put a very quick stop to it, I can assure you. The whole idea of that coup, it was being touted to the army as a right-wing coup. It wasn't, it was a German coup to put Mountbatten in charge because Wilson had flunked the second entry into the EEC. Remember, first entry is Macmillan. Macmillan is a German spy. He promotes Edward Heath as a German spy. Harold Macmillan pretended to be British, was British, but had been blackmailed by the Germans at university. Interesting private life, a bit complicated. Macmillan is a very odd chap. Swang both ways, if you'll forgive the expression. Swang both ways, compromised by the German brothel at university. The Germans had 4 brothels, well, 6 really. They had 2 in London, 1 male, 1 female, and they had 2 brothels at Cambridge, 1 male, 1 female, and 2 at Oxford, 1 male, 1 female. And they tended to keep the brothels, the people running the female brothels didn't know who was running the male brothels. So it was a very, very sophisticated operation. It had been going for decades. They'd recruited Gladstone with the female brothels. Gladstone's private requirements were a little bit excessive for Mrs. Gladstone, and the Jerrys were supplying him with prostitutes. There's a very famous crime was committed. One of the prostitutes went to the editor of the Times, not realising the editor of the Times was also a German spy, and German intelligence became aware that some of the prostitutes were about to talk, or at least one. So they ran an operation to terrify prostitutes in the East End by killing them. They brought over a military surgeon, and the German intelligence operation at the embassy in London ran around knocking over prostitutes in the East End and really, committing gruesome mutilations and all the rest. Very German thing, and it was all blamed on a chap called Jack the Ripper. There was no Jack. The only ripping was being done by the Jerrys. Modern authors who look at Jack the Ripper cannot understand how you could have been in 2 places at once. Well, you can't be in 2 places at once. The answer is he wasn't in 2 places at once because it wasn't a he, it was a they. Much easier, Mr. Chairman, to have 2 people in 2 places at once. In counterintelligence, we always know that if there is one person who's supposed to be in 2 places at once, something must be wrong somewhere. Either the original intelligence is at fault, or we're dealing with a team, not a single individual. The Jerrys then put a rumour about that a royal duke was Jack the Ripper. I mean, the whole Jack the Ripper thing has been a complete fantasy nonsense for over a century. Gladstone, German spy. The brothels, very effective. One of the brothels was used to recruit Harold Macmillan. Harold Macmillan tries to take us into the EEC, fails because de Gaulle blocked it. Now, de Gaulle had cut a deal with the Jerrys, and I am winding up on this is my last point. If I haven't wound you up already, I shall have succeeded by the end of this point. De Gaulle was very close to German intelligence. He had his own channels of communication.